Well, I hope those words that we just sung would resonate and stay in your mind for the next half hour to 40 minutes. That's really where we need to end up today, but it's not where we're going to start today. And if you're a first-time guest with us, welcome. We're glad you're with us. We're actually in a series we're calling The Elephant in the Room, talking about those things that you're not supposed to talk about any place, especially in a church, but we're talking about them. And today we're going to talk about one of those topics. But before I tell you what we're talking about today, let me just ask you a question and just get a response. How many of you have ever, raised your hand and volunteered for something at work or, something at school or around the house? You said, hey, how hard can it be to fix the plumbing? It can't be rocket science. That's why God made you two. How many of you ever raised your hand and said, yeah, I'm going to do that? And after you raised your hand and said, I'll take care of that, I'll handle it, you thought, what in the world am I thinking? Anybody else out there with me this morning? All right. You get that, you're at a job and somebody's got to pick up this project, put a little extra time, and you say, sure, why not? Or, again, I don't know about you, a couple things, I do a lot of stuff around the house, electrical and plumbing. I always convince myself, John, that I can do it. Then I get into it and I think, what in the world am I thinking, right? And actually today, this week, about Thursday, I was talking to Pastor Jason. We were out in the parking lot chatting about some stuff, and I said, man, I'm struggling this week because I'm having one of those, you are such an idiot moments, Mike. What were you thinking to say you're going to talk about the elephant this week, and that is race relations? Honestly. I mean, who do I think I am that I can talk about that? If some of you just kind of look at me and you say, well, you're right, Mike. You have no business talking about this, right? But it's one of those things there, and I want you to know up front that I'm going to get this wrong today in the minds of some of you, and I understand that. Because I'm on my own personal journey with this whole thing. And at times my journey seems like I'm on the Beltway at 6 o'clock on a weekday. And it's like I'm just stopped, and it doesn't seem like I'm going ahead. And when I go ahead, it's just a little bit of ahead, and it just gets painful and tiring, and I get kind of worn out. And I look at it, and I just say, but I want you to know I'm on that journey, and I want you to know that I recognize that I'm probably going to say something or suggest something or do something that's going to offend some of you. But I'm okay with that because we have to talk about this topic. And here's why we have to talk about this topic. First of all, the first step to solving any problem is recognizing there is one, right? Just ask yourself the question, how many of you have ever had a relationship, had some kind of problem in the relationship, but you didn't talk about it, but you thought by not talking about it was going to fix it? Don't raise your hand. Don't look at the person next to you. Just kind of, give me the wink or something like that. Okay, yeah, all right? I mean, we all kind of think, I don't want to talk about it, but I got to, And the question I heard somebody ask years ago, and I think it resonates with me on those occasions, and that's simply this question. How's that working for you? That's why we have to talk about this. But first of all, we got to recognize this problem. And here's the harsh, cold reality. The greatest proponents of the civil rights movement were Christians. The greatest proponents. I mean, some amazing churches of any kind of background, any kind of racial makeup. There are some that stood up and said, we got to do something about that. And that ought to be a proud moment for us as Christians. But here's the flip side of that. The greatest opponents of the civil rights movement were Christians. That's why we need to talk about it. Because Christians have found themselves on sides of lots of different topics, but on this one especially, so often we get it wrong. And I know for some of you, you've been involved in this whole discussion about race relations, and here's where some of us are at today. Some of us are just tired. I know I've heard from some of you. Some of you are just tired. You're tired of hearing about it all the time. Why can't we just be past it? Some of you are tired because you're thinking, why do I have to keep explaining all this? Why don't you just understand? Why do I have to keep going over and over? And you're just tired of it. Some of you are just uncomfortable with it. You don't want to bring it up because if I bring it up, it's just going to be bad, and I don't understand what I'm bringing up anyways, and it's just going to go bad. And some of us are just frustrated. Because how come people don't understand? How come they don't get it? And the reality is, it is way more complex and way more complicated than we imagine. We try to shrink it down to a simple thing. If we just did this, everything would be fine. And the problem is there's just lots of suggestions of what that one thing would be. But it's a deep, in fact, as I've had a chance to meet with some folks over the last few months and kind of engage in this discussion, it has struck me that everybody has a different story. And people have heard different stories growing up. And because you've heard sometimes an opposite, diametrically opposed story growing up, you come to a different kind of conclusion, or you see things differently simply because that's what you've been taught. That's what you've heard. That's what you've experienced, or you've experienced it through that filter. And this whole topic of race relations is just one of those, it is so complex, it is so complicated, that what it tends for us to do is to make us more disconnected instead of bringing us together. And ultimately, we got to figure out a way to get together. And like I said, when I got to Thursday this week, I thought, what were you thinking, Mike? You're the ones that comes up with these sermon topics. You could have said, I'm not doing that one. But no, it was on the postcard. It's on the schedule, so here we are. And because here we are, I got one request for you. That's let's pray together, okay? So let's pray. Father, I am convinced that you love each and every one of us. And you love us equally. And you love us as deeply. But I have to imagine there are times when even your heart hurts over the way we've treated each other, the way we've talked about each other, the way we've done to each other. And I'm not sure if we can ever get this right. But I know your desire is for us to at least try. To risk trying to get it right, even though we may get it wrong, than simply being apathetic or ignoring it or staying away because it's just too scary. And the thing I need right now is for your Spirit not only to be in this room, but to be in my mind and my mouth at this moment. Your Spirit, because your Spirit connects me with your heart and your way of seeing things. And so I just pray today that you can speak in and through and to me. And out of us comes a desire to do something to make the world a better place for everybody. So use this time for your glory in your name. Amen. Here's a statement I saw this week. The reality is we do, and we are. Right? And this is not this whole idea of race relations, it's nothing new. If you read back in your Bible, you'll see the Old Testament, there was battles between different groups and how they looked at people. And you get to the New Testament, and if you're familiar with the New Testament, Old Testament, it was God's people, the Israelites versus the Philistines, right? They were kind of the major ones. There was lots of other ones, but they were kind of the major ones. And then you get the New Testament, and you had the Jews and the Samaritans who were sort of this half-breed, and they looked at them a certain way, or the Jews and the uncircumcised. And the language in that first century when Jesus came to this earth was a language filled with racial comments, with racism, with systems that were out of whack, that was shared both by God's people and people that weren't part of God's people. And how they looked at each other, and how they talked about each other. And there was one thing they shared in common was they hated each other. So at least they had something in common, right? Some of you have been on dates like that, right? You got to look for the one thing that you have in common, And that's where they were at. And it's into that Jesus has this experience. He comes along this this guy. It's found over in Luke chapter 10. And the story begins this way. There's this expert in the law, and when we hear expert in the law, if you're not familiar with the Bible, you hear expert in the law and you think of a lawyer, right? This is not a lawyer. This would be, when it says about an expert in the law, it's talking about not the civil laws, it's talking about a law in religious laws. This is somebody that's looked at the 12 or 1300 laws from the Old Testament and added all the others that were from tradition and from the forefathers, and who was sort of an expert to be able to say, when we come down to this issue, this is what's the right answer, or these are the things that we debate, and goes around. So this is somebody who has spent their whole time trying to figure out right and wrong and how we follow through on those things. And so it says, this expert in law stood up to test Jesus, and if you've been with us the last few weeks, you've noticed that's been a common theme, right? People seem to always want to be testing Jesus. They're always trying to catch him. And so this expert on the law, somebody who's devoted their whole life to understanding religious law, comes to check out Jesus, to challenge Jesus, and he says these words. Teacher, what must I do to get, that is, to inherit eternal life? And I think it's a fair question. It would have been a huge question for a Jew in Jesus' day. What do I got to do to inherit eternal life? Because I'm a child of Abraham. I inherited anyways, but I know there's some part to doing. What do I have to do, Jesus, to get there? And I love what Jesus says. Jesus looks at this expert of the law and says, well, what's written in the law? You're the expert, right? You're the expert, so you tell me. How do you interpret it? What do you get out of it? Well, tell me what it goes. And so the guy says, well, okay. Hey, he's asked me a question. I'm the expert, and here's my answer. Love the Lord your God with your all your heart, all your strength, all your soul, all your mind, and also love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's what the religious lawyer came back with. And I love Jesus' answer. Here's Jesus' answer. Good job. You got it right. Gold star, everything's good. You get an A+ on your answer. You got it right. Do this and you're going to live. To which the guy asked him a question. Says the man, wanting to show the importance of his question or to justify his own actions, says to Jesus, who is my neighbor? And I need to do a little pause here. He's asking some question to sort of, whether to justify his own actions or to show the importance of his question. He's a religious lawyer, and he's trying to say, this was an important question, I want you all to know, and so I'm going to help you all understand the religious law behind this. And so he asked Jesus this question. And what Jesus does is he tells a story, like so often he does. But here's the thing you need to know. Everybody, when they hear Jesus answer, has the exact same response. And let me help you see if I can create that response in your mind, especially for a lot of you who already know where this story is going. So let me talk to the guys just for a moment this morning. Guys, I want you to think back to when you were like a junior or senior in high school, okay? And you got a girlfriend, and you're over at her house on a Saturday evening, and you're down in the basement, and you're watching TV together. And you're hanging on there on the couch, and you are, let's be honest, you're getting into it, all right? In fact, if somebody stepped into that moment and said, Eddie, what are you watching right now? You would have no idea what's going on. You are simply, you are no longer sitting next to each other. You're kind of laying down. In fact, now you are on the floor together, right? You guys all got that picture going on? And right at that moment when, you're watching TV and things are happening, all the lights in the basement go on, and you look up, and there stands her dad looking at you. Some of you are thinking, Mike, I don't have to think about this. I know that experience. That was me. I got it right. But, okay, you know what that feeling is, right? Now imagine it's Monday morning. You're in the caf. A couple of your buddies are hanging around, and you're talking about the weekend. What do you want? You say, man, Saturday night, we were downstairs watching TV. Everybody kind of giggles, because, and you say, we were, doing this, and yada, doing that. And then all the lights come up, and her dad's there. When you tell that to your buddies, you don't have to say, oh, it was really awkward, guys. You don't have to say, it was really embarrassing, right? Your buddies, they all know your pain, right? They all want to throw up and be sick with you at the same time because they know what that would feel like, right? And the one question they have, the question we all have, what happened, right? Because they are sucked into the story. What happens? And they all feel, at your moment, they feel your pain. They feel the awkwardness of that situation. And that feeling that you had maybe when you were a junior or senior, is the feeling everybody who heard Jesus tell the story on that day and in the first century would have had, okay? That's the piece you got to have. When we get to Jesus' response to this guy's question, you got to have that kind of, ooh, that's uncomfortable, I'm not really sure I like that kind of response, okay? Because this guy says, who's my neighbor? It seems like a fair question. But his question really is this: how far is too far? Who do I have to consider my neighbor? Where do I draw the line? Because there's got to be a line someplace, because a certain distance is too far. So how far is too far, Jesus? Let us know your answer, because God says I got to do this. My neighbor, well, who's my neighbor? To which Jesus does as he always does. Jesus answered with a story. And he says a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. That's about 17 miles, long, treacherous area. A guy's going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and some robbers attacked him. They tore his clothes, they beat him, they left him lying there almost dead. This guy is in bad shape. And then it happened that a priest was going down the road. Now, all of us would think, oh, a priest, that's good news, right? You know, the priest, like a pastor, that's good, because a priest is going to go do something good for the guy, right? And I've told you this before. If you're part of our congregation, you've heard this before. Pastor Ann, Pastor Jason, and myself, we all get paid to be good, right? And you all are good for nothing. That's exactly right. So, when the good guy comes along, you're thinking a priest, he's going to stop and take care of this poor guy, right? Because he's paid to be good. But the priest comes down the road, but in the first century, they would have understood this. When he saw the man, he walks by on the other side. In our modern mind, we think, what a terrible priest, what a terrible guy, right? I mean, to walk, you've all had that experience. You're walking down the street, you see somebody that doesn't look like you, doesn't feel like you, you're kind of a little bit worried, and you kind of go on the other side of the street, and you kind of watch them the whole way, right? We've had that experience. And that's what we kind of think. We think, oh, he's staying away. But in the first century, when Jesus tells the story, they would have understood. They would have understood the priest and thought he's not such a bad guy because he's doing what he has to do. Remember, Jesus is telling the story specifically to an expert in the law, an expert in religious law. And he's saying to this guy, you understand the story. In religious law, the priest could not stop and help this guy because if this guy was dead, that meant the priest would be unclean for a certain period of time. He wouldn't be able to do his work. And if he couldn't do his work, the whole system got messed up because you had to have him do his work. You had to offer the sacrifices. You had to have the prayers. And if he can't do it, we got to find somebody else. And it just throws the system off. So he was actually thinking in a big picture when he walks by on the other side. So the priest comes by, walks on the other side, and goes on. Now, it says, next to Levite. And a Levite, most of us have no clue what a Levite is. Sounds kind of official. We kind of think it's a priest. Well, in their context, a Levite was sort of like, we have pastors on our staff, and then we have sort of our office staff, those that help around the building. That's kind of where the Levites would be. They helped around the temple. They took care of a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff. They made sure the priest had the stuff they needed when they needed it. So they had an important job. So this guy comes along, and I love how the expanded version catches this. It says, he came over, he looks at the guy, and then he walks on the other side of the road. This guy's excuse is not as great. Now, he could have made the argument, I'm still unclean, you're not supposed to touch a dead body. But his excuse isn't quite as good. But for a Jewish person, he would still maybe give him a pass because, again, in religious law, he's got to take care of certain things, and so he's required. And so we would understand that maybe this wasn't great. It wasn't a great compassion thing, but according to law, to the strict reading, you got to do what you got to do to provide these things over there. And so they said, those things trump the compassion part. Okay. And then remember back on that night when all the lights go on and how you felt when you're telling your buddies and how your buddies felt, right? Because this is what happens next. See, we instinctively tend to limit for whom we'll exert ourselves. I threw that in because I forgot about that. Now we're going to go back to the story that you're there that night, okay? So you're with your buddies, and they all have that gut feeling, in the pit of their stomach. They're like, oh, man, dude, what happened when, the dad said, what did he say? What did he do? And Jesus hits them with this. Then a Samaritan, traveling down the road, came to where the hurt man was. And for them, the Samaritan was the person they hated most. They were those people. They wanted nothing to do with them. And just even to say the word was dripping with sort of this condemnation. And again, remember in this first century, Jews, when they called somebody uncircumcised, it was a derogatory term. Samaritan, it was a derogatory term. And when people looked at Jews, they saw them as some humans, a race to be wiped out. And this has been going on for thousands of years now. So when they hear Samaritan, they go, what are you talking about, Jesus? This is getting awkward. A priest we understand, a Levite maybe we understand, but now a Samaritan shows up? And when he, that is the Samaritan, saw the man, it says that he, the Samaritan, felt sorry for him, felt compassion for him, which did not compute. Because how could a racist show compassion? How could that kind of person be compassionate? It says the Samaritan went to him and he poured olive oil and wine on his wounds, and you're thinking, that's a weird combination, You got to understand wine back then was not, heavily, not a lot of alcohol, but it was just some way to kind of, cleanse some things, olive oil to kind of soothe some things, cover up the wounds, just to kind of take care of them a little bit, kind of soothe some things till he could get him some more help. So he bandages him up, he puts him on his donkey, he takes him to this inn, this place that they're going to stay, and he cares for him. And it says, the next day after he cares for him all the rest of that day, the Samaritan brings out a couple of coins, a couple of days' worth of pay, goes to the innkeeper and says, hey, take care of this guy. And, watch over him. And if you spend more money on him when I come back, I'll pay it when I come back. And again, if you've heard the story, you already know the story, you already understand this whole stuff, you're going, okay, I know where Mike's going, I already know this whole thing, how it works. We have to understand that in the context of Jesus telling this, he's saying that two of the people who should have had the most compassion, in spite of religious laws and rules, who should have had the most compassion on one of their fellow Jews, walked past him. And it was one of those people who should not have stopped, because we're not sure I would even accept help from that kind of person. They're the one who stops and helps and does something. And then Jesus says these words. Which one of these three men, he asked the religious lawyer, which one of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who was attacked? And if you've heard this, somebody preach on this before, you've probably heard that when the expert law answers, it's the one who showed him mercy, that you've probably heard somebody say that he couldn't even say the word of Samaritan. He was so put off by that. He was so caught. He was so trapped. But it was awkward. There's no doubt about that. But what if? Because there's nothing in the text that tells us that he was so put off he couldn't say Samaritan. What if he was so overcome by both the awkwardness and the unthinkableness that somebody so much different from him would have compassion on him, that the only thing he could say is, the one who showed him mercy. Maybe he no longer saw him just as a Samaritan, just as a fill in the blank, but saw him as somebody with compassion. See, the story doesn't tell us which one he had, which way he kind of goes. To which Jesus says, then go and do what he did. And I want you to catch this because this is huge. I want you to notice that Jesus says, go then and do that. Go do. It doesn't say, if you agree with what I say. He doesn't say, if you need to go pray about this. He doesn't say, if you want to believe this. He doesn't say, if you want to share it, tell somebody else they do it. He doesn't say, you ought to go do this because you should, or you ought to, or you can. He simply says, go and do. What would happen in your life if you went and did more often? Not whether you agreed with it, not whether it was the right time or not. But what if you just simply went and did? See, there was lots of ways to go this morning. We could have simply gone to Paul's writings and said, according to God, there's neither Jew nor Greek, male or female, slave or free, barbarian or Scythian. We could have gone down this whole long list. We could have gone to other things that said, love your enemies, pray for them, turn the other cheek. But for some of us in this room, that's not the message we need to hear. Because we feel like that's just somebody telling us to stay in our place, to do what we've been told. And I don't think that's what Jesus is after. See, when you look at that story, the Levi and the priest, their question as they saw somebody in need was, how is this going to affect me? It's going to mess up my plans. Throw my schedule off. Take too much time. Cause too much hassle. The Samaritan comes by and he asks the opposite question. What's this going to do to him? This person who I don't like and who doesn't like me. But I think there's a deeper question in there. And it's a me question. What would happen to me if I didn't help him? See, is there a way I do unto others, is the way I do unto others inconsistent with the way I want to be done? Is there a disconnect in my life? Is there a disconnect in your life? See, I'm convinced we need a solution. And I was going to say, no, I'm not a bad speller, but I am a bad speller, but that's an intentional bad spelling, all right? So don't write me later, don't email me and say, do you not know how to spell? So, it's intentional, all right? But I'm convinced we need that. When I say we, I mean me. Because we tend to do good to those who look like us, who act like us, to those that we can relate to. Because it's easy. We sang that song earlier, Jesus at the center. And until we can get Jesus at the center, we will continue to have the problems we have. Because Jesus didn't care what color anybody was. Jesus didn't care about how much they knew, how much they earned. In fact, you can make the argument that Jesus cared more for the less fortunate, the minorities, than he did for the majorities. And we really do need a solution. Something that allows God's prompting to reprogram our minds by pricking our hearts and changing our ways. Because all that has to happen. Because we all know racism is a taught and caught thing. It's a learned thing. That's why our minds have to change. But it's not just an educational problem. It's about pricking our hearts. Because until we change something inside of us, Doesn't matter how many rules and laws and how much structure we change. We can pass all the bills we want to as a nation. Say it's not right to discriminate against this group or that group. You have to treat everybody equally. You all know how good those laws work, right? We got the laws, so we're solved. Until something changes here, and that there's some changing of our ways. Because this whole topic is not just a system problem, is not just an educational problem, is not just an economic problem, is not just a cultural problem, is not just an apathy problem, is not just a privilege problem. It is all those things. It is so complex and so complicated that it's easy to say we're never going to fix this. But my question for all of us is it really up to us to fix it? Or is it up to us to allow God's prompting in our lives, to reprogram our minds, to prick our hearts, to change our behaviors, and to invite others into that kind of experience? There's two quotes I want to share with you. One is from the great theologian Bono. I've heard a couple of times talk about his faith and had a very interesting faith journey. If you ever heard much of U2's music, you know there's a spiritual element to it. And he's become much more out in his faith in Jesus over the last few years. But I love what he said at a awards program. He said, "True religion will not let us fall asleep in the comfort of our freedom." Now, he said it with an Irish accent, so it sounds so much more sexy and thoughtful. But I thought, what a powerful statement. True religion will not let us fall asleep in the comfort of our freedom. And then his words following that were, we're to love our enemies is not a suggestion, but a command. The other one I go to is from Martin Luther King Jr., which again, this is a quote that I fear putting up because somebody could say, oh, you're just throwing it up to try to kind of push us that way. We got to get up and do something. We got to change the way we do get to make this thing do. I want you just to listen to his spirit of a man who was there, who lived through it, and sadly died through it. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. And what Martin Luther King Jr. understood that is so hard for some of us to understand. It's not the power of hatred, but it's the cost of hatred. The cost of hatred. And understanding the power of hatred, but not its cost, we forget the power of love and its cost. There's this great statement that I love over in Revelation chapter 5. The scene there is, it's a picture of heaven, and John is having a vision, so we know this is kind of a thing he's trying to make sense of. It says he kind of sees heaven, and he sees these people around there. He sees these four kind of creature-like things, these living beasts, he calls them. He sees these 24 elders, these 24 people around there. He sees God the Father. He sees God the Son. There's this discussion. There's this scroll. It's all this kind of scene. But in the midst of that whole idea of who can open the scroll, who can give the answer, there's this great little window into what I think is God's heart and God's desire in there. And check this out. It says they all singing about these elders and these beasts and all of heaven there. It says they all sang a new song to the Lamb, something they hadn't been able to sing before. And the new song goes something like this. I don't know what the tune necessarily is, so I'm not going to sing it, but it kind of goes like this. You know, you're worthy, bump, 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 to take the scroll, bump, 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 to open its seals, because you were killed, that is, you were slaughtered, and with the blood of your death, you bought, ransom, redeem, and don't miss this, because of your death, because you were slaughtered, and with the cost of your blood, you bought, you redeemed, you ransomed people for God, people for God from every tribe, every language, every people, and every nation. That what Jesus did, the reason he was worthy to open this thing that nobody else could, was because of his choice and his decision to come to this planet, to live, to die, to come back to life, to purchase something that could not be done in any other way. A people for God from every tribe, from every language, from every people, from every nation. The word nation there is this idea of race. The color of your skin, your nation of origin. From people is that those people groups. The language. One of our songs earlier we sang Spanish. I don't even know Spanish. I flunked it 3 times in school, but I got most of the words, And from every tribe. And tribe is a hard thing for us in America to understand because we don't feel like we have tribes. But you hear about in other places in the world, tribes are bigger things than just their nation. There's this national identity, but ultimately it's about your tribe. Pastor Jason helped me understand this week. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but this is like Cowboy fans. And Redskin fans. And Raven fans. And Patriot fans. Even Giants fans, yes, yeah. Amen. Pray for them. But it is this idea, you got those things that are close, yeah, I'm an American, but man, don't mess with my team, I'm a Yankees fan, I'm a Mets fan, I'm a Royals, whatever you're kind of, it's those kind of things. It's those things that mean so much to us. And this picture from heaven is that Jesus died for each and every one of those groups because he wanted to do something. He wanted to take all these groups from all different places that don't have a whole lot in common and give them one thing in common. That they are people for God. Because notice what he says next. You made them, every tribe, every nation, every race, every group of people. You have made them to be a kingdom, not a bunch of kingdoms, a kingdom and priests for our God. And they will reign on the earth. And while this reigning may be some kind of future idea that when everything gets there just perfect and right, what if God would love to see that happen even today? That we would reign, not the idea of I'm in control and power, but we begin to reign simply because our lives have been changed. Our focus has been readjusted. And we've seen something different than even we've been taught growing up. We've seen a picture of a God who was willing to die for you. Was willing to take that step knowing that some of us would say, stick it in your ear, God. But he was willing to risk it because not risking it was going to be too costly. And here's my hope as we wrap this thing up today. See, some of us in this room, we have a story. We have a reason. We have frustration. We have anger. We have experience. We have stuff that other people don't understand and know, and they really should know and understand. They don't know what life is like. We have all those kinds of things. But our question as a follower of Jesus is, what am I going to do about that? How will I respond to that? And God, would you help? Help me to understand. Help me to see. And help me to do. Because that's what it means to be a neighbor. So if you'd like to write a letter to me this week about how I shouldn't have talked about race relations, who did I think I was? The address is pastorann@gmail.com. Just you can pile them all over there, right? I want to be honest as we wrap this thing up. I don't know the solution. I don't know what it is, and I don't know how to fix it. And you can't really know how unless you know what it is. But I do know why. There is too much at stake for us to treat each other like Samaritans. Because you and you and you and everybody out there is more valuable than we could ever imagine or know. And that really is the message and story of Jesus.